Hi everybody, this is the second video in the Chemistry of Life uh, tutorial. This is going to cover properties of water. The first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of the Sunshine State Standard that is attached to this. It is SC.912.11.18.12, discuss the special properties of water that contribute to Earth's suitability as an environment for life. Its cohesive behavior, its ability to moderate its temperature, its expansion upon freezing, and its versatility as a solvent. Now we're going to cover a lot of this. So again, we go fast, so if you need to, pause it or rewind. The structure of water contributes to its unique properties. Water has a very neutral charge because of the fact that it all evens out, but it has 10 protons and 10 electrons, and that makes it overall have an even charge. But it does have a charged area. You'll notice that water does not evenly bond. The hydrogen molecules do not attach to it evenly. Instead, if they are pulled to the side, they're pulled closer to each other. As a result, there is a slightly positive area and a slightly negative area. If you can think of a structure that has a slightly positive and negative area, you could probably think of a few things. That would include things such as batteries or magnets. And so, if there's a positive and negative side, like a battery, then it overall has no charge, but it does have a positive and negative area to it. I prefer to think of it more as magnets because water has a positive pole and a negative pole. It is polar. Its polar nature gives it all the unique properties that we're going to be looking at here, and it behaves to me very much like a magnet, and that's why I tend to think of it as a magnetic molecule. The O side has a negative charge. The hydrogen sides have a positive charge, and it means the whole thing behaves like a magnet. If you put buckets of them together, you get them sticking to each other just like magnets would. Where they stick to each other, we call that a hydrogen bond. And those hydrogen bonds are kind of the key to everything because water makes these hydrogen bonds. These hydrogen bonds give it all of its different properties that make it so important to life on Earth. The attraction between a hydrogen atom with a partial positive charge and another atom with a partial negative charge is called a hydrogen bond. Because water is a polar molecule, it is able to form multiple hydrogen bonds, which account for many of water's special properties. Keep this in mind as we go through here. These bonds are what's important. The first thing we're going to talk about is how forming these bonds make water slow to heat up and slow to cool. Think about this. We have to add energy to water to break these bonds. So instead of water getting thermally warmer, it actually breaks these bonds first. So water is slower to heat up. It also has to make these bonds as it cools off, so it's slower to release its energy. Water is slow to heat up and slow to cool because it takes energy to make and release these bonds. As a result, we live on a water planet. Our water planet is covered in an unbelievable amount of water. There's way more surface area of water than there is land. And so as the Earth goes through its day, it gets part of it faces the sun, part of it is away from the sun. Space is very cold, but the sun is very warm, so we live in a really interesting place. Plus, we also live in the Goldilocks zone, which keeps us so far enough away from the sun that the water doesn't evaporate, but not too far away that it turns into ice. Therefore, we have a liquid water planet, which is a really rare thing, but also that water is slow to cool off and slow to heat up, meaning that we don't have wild temperature fluctuations. You may think, oh yeah, well it got really cold last night and it's warm today. Well, that may be true, but it could be even wilder than that. Our Earth has what we call a very moderate temperature that is very conducive to life on Earth. We have warm zones, moderate zones, and cool zones, but the life on Earth, the cell-based life on Earth, can stay at a liquid state. The cell-based life on Earth cannot freeze. Freezing kills things, and too hot kills things because the water can't behave right either. So they have to have a very moderate temperature. The Earth provides us that moderate temperature. Another thing is since our body is made of 75% of water, it's slow to heat up and cool off as well. And you may think, well, I get hot and cold. Yeah, but you would get much warmer and much cooler if you weren't full of 75% water. So water gives our bodies and our cells the ability to stay liquid. We live on a water planet that is liquid, and water provides this environment in which cells can thrive, but only in certain situations because we're in that Goldilocks zone. But what an incredibly bizarre situation. That's why when we look around the universe, we think life is rare, if non-existent at all, in the rest of the universe, because it's such a hard thing to do to find a water planet in the Goldilocks zone. Although the more we look, the more we realize that it may not be as rare as we think. We're still learning. But right now, life on Earth is a incredibly complicated and rare thing, and it's only made possible because of this property of water. Another property of water is that it's sticky. Because those a bucket full of water behaves like a bucket full of magnets, it's sticky. You may have performed this experiment before. If not, you should. It's a really cool thing, but water has this ability to hang on to each other. The molecules grab each other like magnets do, and they tend to behave differently. If this were a live class, I would show you how alcohol won't do this, because alcohol is not polar and it doesn't stick like this. You could do the same experiment with alcohol, and the water will just kind of, or the liquid will just kind of splash down on this and will not form this weird bubbly shape. But because water grabs it to itself and sticks to itself, you can create this unbelievable shape. And this gives us a lot of properties. For one thing, we get this stuff called adhesion and cohesion. Water sticks to itself very well. It also sticks to the things that it sticks to lots of things, like objects that are polar or charged, which most objects are. So water sticks to itself, and it sticks to lots of other things. You may have seen water beat up on the surface of a car after a rain or after you've washed it. This is an example of cohesion. But this property gives us a very special thing that creates a situation inside of plants that all plant life on Earth would not exist if it weren't for this property, and it's called transpiration. Have you ever wondered how water gets to the very tops of the leaves of a plant? There's no pump. There's no pumping situation. Like with me and my body, blood is pumped with my heart through vessels to the top of my head and the bottom of my toes. Plants don't have a pumper of any form. So how does water that goes in at the roots of a tree go all the way to the top of the tree? And I've been next to the tallest trees in the world, sequoias out in California, and the redwoods. These are very tall trees. How does water get from the roots, which can be hundreds of feet below the surface, to the top of a tree, which can be hundreds of feet above the surface? It goes against the flow of gravity. It does this through transpiration and cohesion. Cohesion is the idea that water sticks to the edges of things, like this xylem tissue in a plant. It's like a very thin straw. Water will stick to the side of the xylem, and it'll also stick to itself, and it actually creates a situation in which it starts to crawl up the sides of the tube. And the thinner the tube, the more it can crawl. And there is a distance, I'm not sure what, but it's very thin. But at a thin enough distance between, or width of this tube, water can literally climb all the way up, and it can climb up. There's no maximum distance. This is called the cohesion transpiration theory. As water evaporates out of the leaves, more water comes up, and it can bring with it nutrients and dissolved minerals and all kinds of things that are responsible for a plant to thrive. All plants do this. Not true. Changed my mind. All vascular plants do this. There are some plants that aren't vascular. They're very small. And we don't interact with them much, but most of the plants we interact with are called vascular plants. This is called a vascular tissue, the xylem, and if it weren't for this thin tissue of xylem that can carry water up against the flow of gravity, we wouldn't have plants of any particular size at all. Even grass has to have a vascular tissue. It's too big for water to move any other way. So all plant life on Earth is thankful. We're thankful to have it because of this transpiration and property of water. Again, all plant life on Earth, not almost all plant life on Earth, has to have it. Okay. Another thing that water does is it forms these hydrogen bonds, and the more that it forms, the cooler it gets, the more that it forms, and it reaches a point to where it forms these bonds as it cools off. The cooler it gets, it forms these bonds, and it creates a crystalline lattice structure called ice. Interesting thing about ice is that as these crystalline structures form, they actually push water away from each other, and it's such a rare thing. Most things, as they cool off, they become more dense, but water actually becomes less dense when it becomes ice than it is at a liquid state. And so its solid state is less dense than its liquid state, because of the way that these lattices form and they push away from each other, and we get a very interesting situation in which ice floats. Floating ice is a crucial thing to all life on Earth, because we have things like glaciers and icebergs. There is a glacier at the poles. The North Pole is covered in a lot of glaciers. The South Pole is covered in so much ice that at the South Pole, the ice layer is literally a mile thick. If all of that ice were to be at the bottom of the ocean, there would be no surface land. So because this ice forms these polar ice caps, we have a lower overall water level on the earth, and that's why we have our um, the land surfaces that we have. Without ice doing what it does, because water's polar molecule makes ice float, um, we would not have any land surfaces. So again, something that I'm thankful for. Moving along, water forms solutions and suspensions. Now, solutions are what happens when you dissolve something into water. You've done it. You've made Kool-Aid, or you've made something like that. And when you pour the sugar in and you stir it, all of that sugar gets dissolved into the water. That's called a solution. There are other types of things also called suspensions, in which it doesn't dissolve, but it floats inside of it. And we have these two things that we have because of water's polar nature. It'll dissolve that, or it can support something, but dissolving is very important. And as a result, almost every solution in biology has water as its solute. As its solvent, and we call these aqueous solutions. Water dissolves things, and that's very important that we know this. Water is not pure. It's found almost always as some kind of a mixture. When you open up your sink and you get water coming out, that's not pure H2O. There's things dissolved in it. When you drink water, that's not pure H2O. There are things that are dissolved in it. And sometimes those are bad things, but most of the times those are good things, things that we need to for our body to work. And in fact, drinking pure distilled water that you should have very little, if anything, dissolved in it is actually not good for you. You should be drinking spring water or some other type of water. So a mixture is a material composed of two or more elements or compounds that are physically mixed together but not chemically combined. That is not a solution. Suspensions are mixtures; they are not chemically combined together. So there's solutions and suspensions, and these are things that are found um, in biology, in life. Solutions contain two parts: the solute and the solvent. The way I always remember this is I basically say the solute goes into the solvent. I make a little hand motion where I put one hand as the solute, it goes into the solvent, so I kind of make my hand going into the solvent. That helps me to remember what is what. And by the way, water is almost always the solvent. So what we're dissolving into the water is the solute. That can be things like sugar, that can be things like salt, that can be things like Kool-Aid packets or tea if you're making some type of beverage, but it can also be things like oxygen or whatever else is dissolved into our blood, because our blood is a solution. Water's polarity gives it the ability to dissolve these things so that they can be moved around in our bodies, and it makes them active in a way that our bodies can use. So is blood a solution or suspension? Well, it's a little bit of both, actually. The I gave blood yesterday, in fact, and they pulled out plasma out of me. And this plasma is a solution because it has all kinds of things dissolved in it, but it's also a suspension because it has globules of things dissolved in it, or floating around in it, such as blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, all kinds of T cells and stuff. It also has fat globules floating around in it. So water is a little bit of both. It's a solution in the plasma, but it's also a suspension because the plasma has things floating around in it. And this is kind of a common thing found in all living things. The inside of each cell contains something called cytoplasm, and it has a little bit of water. It's made out of water with stuff dissolved in it, but it's got stuff floating in it. So when we talk about cells, remember that cytoplasm is both a solution and a suspension. This can only be done because of water's shape. Remember that offset shape in which those hydrogens come around and they're not evenly spread across the oxygen. That's the whole thing. That gives us every single property of water that we use. Another thing, or some types of solutions, are acids and bases. Acids and bases are very important for living things. We cannot, a lot of the metabolism that happens in our body happens as a result of an acid or a base solution causing it. Okay, think of your stomach acid, for example. That is somewhere down here, gastric acid. It's a very strong acid. It helps us to tear apart and dissolve the food that we eat. Blood is a little bit further down the list. It's not entirely, it's somewhere down just below a 7, somewhere between around a 6. But a lot of the things that we use in our daily lives and a lot of things that happen in our body are not at a 0 pH. They either have a base or an acid. By the way, the bases are at the top, the acids are at the bottom, right? And the further away you get from 7, 7 is neutral. It has no, it is distilled water. It has no pH. Well, it has a pH of 7. It's not an acid or a base. But the further away you get from it, it's not a linear curve. It's actually 6 is 1,000 times stronger of an acid than 7, but 5 is 1,000 times stronger than 6, and 4 is 1,000 times stronger than 5. This is called a logarithmic scale, and so the further away you get from 7, it gets much stronger very quickly. And bases are the same way. So bases have inside of them a compound called an OH minus or a hydroxide. They have a higher concentration of of hydroxide ions. These OH minuses, they create a base. The strong bases from 11 to 14 are pretty powerful bases. They are very good at dissolving. They're very good at doing other chemical reactions. Acids are the same way. They have an H plus ion inside of them called hydronium, and the more hydronium they have, the stronger they are. The strong acids go all the way down from 3 to 1, and that includes things like your orange and lemon juices or your stomach acid. Hydrochloric acid in your stomach is very strong. One thing that happens is that inside of solutions, quite often there are things that are called buffers. Buffers are weak acids or bases. They react with strong acids or bases to prevent a sharp sudden change in pH. Your body does not like to have strong acids just running freely. Now, it uses strong acids only when it needs it. So one of the ways that it can control these acids is by using buffers. Your stomach acid can get out of control and you take a Tums, and that is a buffer that goes inside and helps to control your stomach acids. So as a result, just a quick review, the structure of water has one oxygen and two hydrogens. The hydrogens are not evenly placed across the oxygen. They are kind of pulled to the side a little bit. That gives it a positive and a negative structure called polarity. The polar nature of water gives it all of its characteristics, and the best way to do that is to review it by looking at the standard. Because of water's polar nature, it is cohesive and adhesive. It is slow to warm up and slow to cool off. It expands upon freezing, and it creates an amazing solvent. These are things that you need to remember about water, and it's all because of its shape. Don't forget that. And that covers the properties of water. It was very rapid. Please go back through this if you need to. And thank you. We will see you on the next video.